Jordan here, The Means of Meaning. I've got another great video for you today. I'm excited to show you. I'm going to be making a combination panel for oil painting. And you're probably wondering what a combination panel is. And simply put, it's a braced plywood panel with a fabric stretched on the front of it. It's the best of both worlds when it comes to painting supports. When considering a support for painting, the choice often boils down to cloth or wood, to which there are both advantages and disadvantages. The issue with a solid wooden panel is it can warp and crack, and it's often heavy, where the main drawbacks to painting on a stretched cloth is increased likelihood of cracking to the paint layer, as the canvas will remain flexible while the paint grows more brittle with age. And then, of course, there's the rotting of natural fibers to deal with, and often that begins at the edges of paintings where the stretcher bars touch the canvas, and that can accelerate the rotting process. I have this great book by Virgil Elliott. It's called Traditional Oil Painting, and it details oil painting best practices. In the book, Virgil goes into detail on creating a combination support. I'm going to be referencing some of his steps and adding in some of my own to show you how I make my own supports for painting. A support is really the foundation of a painting, and in my opinion, it underscores the tone of the entire artwork. There's so many ways to make your own art unique and meaningful by starting with a support that you make yourself or perhaps you find. You know, using a rough or toothed surface, for instance, is going to produce a completely different painting than a smooth and flawless one, and that's part of the beauty of making it yourself. When it comes to painting, most people don't really think about the supports. They often default to one of these commercially manufactured stretched canvases, kind of like the 2-pack I have here. I picked it up at Michael's for, you know, 25 bucks or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with these depending on the goals of your painting. However, scientific analysis has shown that most of these prefab canvases using acrylic gesso won't last more than 50 years before they start to deteriorate, or things like delamination might occur. And so understanding how to create durable archival supports is key to the longevity and lasting impact of your painting. So without further ado, let's get into it, and I'm going to start creating my combination panel. Okay, let's take a look at some of the materials and equipment that I'll need to create my combination panel. The first item is plywood. I use a birch plywood board. This one's from Home Depot, and these are available at any major hardware store or lumber yard. They're sturdy, and most importantly, they're lightweight. I'm using a size of 28 7/8 of an inch by 16 3/8 of an inch, because I have a beautiful antique gilded frame that I've restored, and I want this combination panel to fit perfectly into that frame. Of course, you can cut your panel to any size you want. It's easy at the Home Depot. You can just ask one of their friendly staff to help you cut it down, and I believe that the first 2 cuts are free. Next, I'm going to need 2 by 1 inch basswood strapping. I'll use these to brace the plywood board and to prevent warping. I've actually planed these pieces down so the profile of my panel is under the original depth. Again, I did this just so that the panel will fit nicely into my frame. Additionally, I've cut one of my strapping pieces with a 45-degree angle to incorporate a French cleat hanging system. You don't have to do this, but if you'd like to, you'll need either a table saw or a circular hand saw. I've got this really great one from Ryobi. It's available at the Home Depot, and it's great because it's small, it's powerful, and it's cordless. I'm going to be using a basic miter box and handsaw to cut my basswood strapping with mitered corners for a perfect fit. You can get some of the same cuts with the circular saw, but I like the handsaw for accuracy. A good quality wood glue is really important, and I prefer this brand of Gorilla Glue. I have some wood filler available as well in case I have some imperfections that I need to fix up. Of course, you'll need a tape measure, a pencil, some sandpaper, and if you want to get fancy, you can use a palm sander. This one's also cordless. It's by Ryobi as well. Really great palm sander. And I picked up some oversized craft sticks or popsicle sticks, as well as disposable clear cups to keep things off the tabletop during the gluing process. I'm going to be using a Varathane wood stain. This is called the Ultimate Wood Stain One Coat Coverage from Varathane. It gives me a nice antique color to my panel, and it'll partially seal the panel. I've chosen this early American color, but you can choose any color that your heart desires. After that layer, we're going to be applying this Varathane Triple Thick Fine Coat Clear Polyurethane Sealer in matte finish to really lock out any moisture. This will not only protect the wood panel, but also the fabric that we're going to stretch on top of the front of the panel. Once I've completed the panel, I'll need a good quality fabric to stretch on top. I prefer linen because when it comes to textiles, I'm more of a traditionalist, but you can use anything from cotton canvas, hemp, or as Virgil Elliott explains in traditional oil painting, polyester is also a good choice, and it might prove to be more archival than any of the other choices. Only time will tell in that case. Find a local fabric store that can help you buy the right material. When dealing with textiles, it's always good to have a fabric iron and ironing board to press the material flat before working with it. I'm using a VAE copolymer mounting adhesive. And this is to mount the linen to the panel. This one's from Rublev Colors. It's a professional quality adhesive that's waterborne, and it dries to a water-insoluble, strong and flexible film that's ideal for adhering and mounting fabric or paper to woods and metals. It's made from polyvinyl alcohol, PVOH, stabilized VAE copolymer with properties indicating it as the best choice among VAE adhesives for conservation use. It does not contain formaldehyde, has good dry tack, good clarity when dry, and it's non-cross-linking upon aging. I'll have a basic printmaker's brayer on hand for when it comes time to adhere the fabric to the panel. And later in the process, I'll need to, size that linen. I could choose to go with a traditional rabbit skin glue, and that's really what the old masters used for centuries. However, I've got this Gamblin PVA size, and it works really well. Studies have shown that PVA size will be more stable than RSG with shifting temperature changes over time. It dries with a similar tooth to RSG to grab the ground and dries more or less clear. PVA size is ideal as a sealer for protecting against support-induced discoloration, a condition resulting from impurities that are drawn up through an unprimed substrate as the paint dries, discoloring the paint. You don't want that. Another great choice is this product from Rublev Colors. It's called Rublev Fluid Medium. It does pretty much the same thing. For this step, I'm also going to need some other tools like scissors, good pair of scissors, utility knife, a pack of inexpensive chip brushes, 2-inch chip brushes, and it's always handy to have some paper towel and rubbing alcohol on hand for cleanup. I just picked up the rubbing alcohol at my local drugstore, Shoppers Drug Mart. I've got this big bucket of sand moving over to grounds. Now this is regular old beach sand, just from the Saugeen Shores here in Ontario, and I'm going to wash it and use it as part of a double ground layer a la Rembrandt. Once we've got the panel made and the fabric adhered, I'll need to apply a ground layer, and I'm going to need a muller and slab to grind together this special ground mixture. You'll probably notice this one sitting on the table here. I designed this muller and slab with a stone craftsman. It's made from Ontario Grey Stanstead granite, but you can get these glass mullers. This one is from Rublev, or you can buy them on Amazon, and all you need is a piece of glass to mull on. It's handy to have some palette knives on hand. I even have some drywall knives to handle the paint mixture when you're working during the mulling process. I'll be applying this double ground layer, as I mentioned, inspired by Rembrandt. And so I'm going to need for the first layer a red ochre pigment of some kind. I have this red Sartorius earth from Rublev Colors. Now Sartorius red earth is a natural mineral containing clay tinted by iron oxide that gives an exceptionally warm orange-red hue. This particular pigment originates from mineral deposits in the Tuscany region of Italy. A good quality linseed oil is really important, and I'm using my own sun-thickened linseed oil that I created myself using the methods of Louis R. Velasquez last summer. So I like Rublev's color lead oil grounds. This is a great product. It's made with 3 white pigments: calcite, or ground calcium carbonate, such as chalk, lead white, which is a basic lead carbonate, and titanium white, or titanium dioxide, in just the right proportions to make a film that remains flexible, tough, and to some degree, has some absorbency. The dry ground calcite in this lead oil ground has a closely controlled particle size distribution. An important note is that this ground does not contain zinc oxide, which can cause blistering and cracking in the paint layer. You can really feel the lead in this tin. It's so heavy. So for the last ground layer, I'm going to need a bone black pigment. You want to choose one that's bound with linseed oil only. Rublev Bone Black, also known as bone char or animal charcoal, is an opaque, cool black with good tinting strength. It's produced by charring animal bones. The bones are heated to a high temperature without oxygen. It consists mainly of calcium phosphate and a smaller amount of carbon. Ivory black is an artist pigment formerly made by grounding charred ivory. As you know, today we don't have access to ivory, and so ivory black is considered really synonymous for bone black. I have a plastic scraper tool here that I'm going to be using to apply the ground smoothly. And then I picked up these foam rollers, basic foam rollers, also from Home Depot. And I like the smooth and consistent eggshell finish that these rollers provide. Getting right down to it, I also picked up some brass tacks. Now, brass is a zinc and copper alloy, neither of which can rust. And I'm going to be using these on the edge of the canvas just to tack down the fabric to the panel. Last but not least, it's really important to have some PPE close by. We're all familiar with PPE now, and it's especially important when handling hazardous products containing lead and dry pigments. I have these KN95 masks and some extra large black disposable gloves on hand. So that's pretty much it for materials and equipment. Let's move along to assembling our panel. Let's get into assembling my panel now. As I mentioned, my birch board is 28 3/8 of an inch tall by 16 7/8 of an inch wide. I start by deciding which side of my panel is the front and which side is the back. Usually one side will look a little bit nicer than the other, and this one has a few knots in it, so I'll determine that this is going to be the back of my panel. In pencil, I'll mark out where I want the strapping to go so there are no mistakes. Then I begin by measuring and cutting my strapping with the miter box and handsaw. Remember to measure twice and cut once. I cut these with a 45-degree angle on the corners for a really clean finish. That piece that I cut with a French cleat angle will go on the side that I determined to be the top of my panel. And that's so that I can hang it. Other than the sides, I believe I'll only need one support in the center of this panel. As you get into making larger size supports, more bracing may be necessary, and you may consider corner braces, etc. Once I've done a dry assembly to make sure everything is cut correctly, I'll begin to glue down the strapping. Now I coat each piece entirely using my handy craft sticks for easy application. This Gorilla Glue is super strong, and so a little goes a long way. Some will inevitably squish out the sides, and I try and keep some paper towel handy to keep everything clean and free of glue drips. We don't want any glue drips. I use clamps to keep it together while it's drying, and I have these handy little shims here to prevent the clamps from marking my wood panel. Okay, so that's it for assembly. I'm gonna leave this to set and dry overnight, and I'll be back in the morning to see how everything came together. Guess that was the take. So my cradle panel's been drying overnight. I cleaned up all the coffee spills. I removed the clamps, and I think my panel's looking pretty good. I now have an assembled birch panel with an incorporated French cleat hanging system. I'm gonna add some wood filler to a few small areas that I've identified on the back, and then I'll give it a quick sand before moving on to staining and sealing my panel. It's important to stain and seal both the front and back of the panel before mounting the cloth. This isolates the fabric from the acids in the wood, which would otherwise accelerate the rotting of linen or cotton canvas. Polyester fabric does not seem to be affected by the acids in the wood in the same ways as natural fabrics are, and might be considered a preferable support fabric for that exact reason. I like to start with the back side of the panel, and I'll make sure that the panel and my workspace is clean and clear of dust, dirt, grease, or glue. Stir or shake the can of stain before using it. Apply one coat of the stain liberally with a clean 2-inch chip brush. Apply the stain across the grain until the wood is saturated on top, and allow it to penetrate for 1 to 3 minutes. Then remove the excess by wiping it with a cloth in the direction of the grain. Removal of all the excess material is essential to ensure proper dry time and proper adhesion of the top coat. It's important to wear gloves and a mask for this part. I'll let the stain dry for about an hour before flipping the panel over to stain the front side in the same manner. Once the stain is dry, I'll start applying the Varathane triple thick 1 coat clear matte polyurethane. That's this one. I'll stir the polyurethane thoroughly. Don't shake it, as this will create bubbles in the finish. I use clear disposable cups as razors for my panel so that it sits above the tabletop to avoid sticking to the protective paper that I have on the table and making a big mess, essentially. Apply using a fresh 2-inch chip brush and let it dry for a minimum of 2 hours. Lower or higher temperatures may affect drying times. Once the front and the back have been coated with the polyurethane, it's important to wait between 2 and 7 days before beginning to stretch the cloth onto the front of our panel. So it's been just under a week since I sealed my panel with polyurethane, and I'm now ready to adhere the linen fabric to the front of my panel. I begin by pressing the linen with a clothing iron on my ironing board to get out any of the creases or wrinkles that the linen might have. If necessary, I can clean the panel surface with rubbing alcohol, but I won't do that in this case because my panel's looking really great. It's nice and clean. And I just feel that it's important to note that you need to ensure the panel is free of debris, oil, and other contaminants, or the mounting process might not go so well. I start by applying the Rublev mounting adhesive over the entire face of the panel, making sure not to leave any areas exposed. That's also a really important note with this product. Don't leave any area without adhesive or it won't dry properly. Apply the adhesive with random brush strokes to avoid creating patterns in the adhesive and then potentially on the canvas or linen or polyester, whatever fabric you're using. Smooth the linen with a firm, even pressure using a rubber brayer or roller to make sure all the air bubbles or excess is removed. Don't apply too much pressure on the brayer or roller while rolling over the surface. Just a nice uniform force is all you need. In the early 1980s, the Canadian Conservation Institute, or CCI, initiated a project to evaluate selected commercially available PVAC adhesives for pH, emissions of harmful volatiles, flexibility, strength, and yellowing upon dark and light aging. This research identified various adhesives with desirable properties, but the VAE dispersions displayed the best, most stable properties. They were close to neutrality, released very few harmful volatile products, they were flexible, of medium strength, and displayed good resistance to yellowing, and generally kept these characteristics upon aging. For example, one of the best VAEs identified was Jade 403, a widespread conservation VAE adhesive. Still, Jade had an irritating odor and other properties that or at least significantly less than, for example, a Beva 341, which is sort of a conservator standard in mounting adhesives. All right, let's get back to my panel. Once I've got the front face glued down, I'm going to start applying the adhesive to each side and trimming the material to fit the panel. I have my utility knife and scissors on hand to cut each side to size. And I do a neat little nip and tuck and fold down on the corners, sort of like wrapping a present. I'll run my blade across the edge of the panel for a perfect cut. There's really not one proper process for this. It's part of the art. I repeat the process on all four sides and allow the adhesive to dry overnight at the very least. Rublev actually recommends 2 to 3 days of dry time before placing stress on the fabric, so that's what I'll do. I'll be back in a few days for the next step, which is sizing the linen. Step 4, sizing the linen. Progressing upward from the supports, I've created this cradled birch wood panel, adhered a linen fabric to it, and now I'm ready to seal it or size the linen. Traditionally, the preferred size was a weak solution of hide glue like RSG, which is rabbit skin glue, spread very thinly and evenly over the entire canvas and allowed to dry completely before applying a ground layer. However, conservators have recently identified hide glue as a cause of cracking in old oil paintings, and especially on unsupported canvas fabric, they no longer recommend it. In recent years, certain synthetic substances have been developed that are better suited than hide glue for sizing fabric supports, namely a neutral pH or buffered polyvinyl acetate, that's PVA. This material has been proven to be superior with shifting temperatures and oil absorption. In addition, it's a lot easier to apply correctly, so according to Virgil Elliott, there's no longer any good reason to continue to size with hide glue. So let's get into the sizing process. With Gamblin PVA size, it's really easy. I start by shaking the PVA really well before I apply it to my stretched linen with a 2-inch chip brush. Using the brush, I scrub the PVA size into the fabric. I'll coat the surface really well, but don't let the size pool. And that's it. I let it dry thoroughly for 24 to 48 hours on my plastic cup risers. It's now that exciting time where I get to apply the ground layers to my support. For those who don't know, a ground is a stable absorbent layer of paint that sits between the support and the painting itself, allowing one layer to safely adhere to the other. The language around painting grounds can sometimes be confusing at first, as words like primer, meaning first coat, or gesso, meaning chalk in Italian, are terms frequently used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. Gesso is also a term adopted by modern commercial paint manufacturers to describe an acrylic-based ground, and that's totally different than traditional gesso. Traditionally, gesso grounds were made from white carbonate pigments like chalk, or like this calcium carbonate that I have here, mixed with an animal hide glue, such as RSG. Traditional gesso is applied in layers, anywhere between 6 and 10 layers, to a sized wooden panel, and when sanded and polished, it produces an ivory-like surface. Traditional gesso grounds are brittle, and they should really only be used on rigid surfaces, not on stretched canvas. With the development of oil painting during the 15th century, more flexible oil-based grounds were developed for fabric canvas. The best grounds were made from linseed oil mixed with a lead white pigment. Unlike traditional gesso, oil primers need only 1 or 2 layers, and a lot of times that's exactly what I'll do. A single ground layer in a mid-tone cool gray or warm burnt umber color that's made with linseed oil, pigment, and lead white. In this video, however, I'm excited to explore a Rembrandt-esque double ground, which is discussed in this fantastic book, Rembrandt, the Painter at Work, by the late Ernst van de Adhering, a book that I highly recommend. And if you're interested in Rembrandt's methods and materials, this is a must-have for your library. So what is a double ground? Well, a double ground is a painting technique involving the application of 2 layers of priming on a canvas or panel before the actual painting process begins. The technique serves multiple purposes. 1, it provides a smoother surface for the painting. 2, it helps to reduce the absorbency of the canvas. And 3, it can add a tonal underlayer that influences the overall look of the painting. 17th century Dutch Golden Age painters prepared their canvases with a double ground. First, a layer of red ochre to even out the texture of the canvas, followed by a layer of gray paint containing lead white. And that's what van de Adhering and other scientific researchers have shown is what Rembrandt prepared his canvases with. And he did it with a bit of a twist. He added a quartz sand, which is what I'm going to be doing with my Rembrandt-inspired double ground layer for this custom combination panel that I'm creating. In Rembrandt's time, and even today, the pigments needed for this made it a very expensive process, and it took a long time before anything was dry enough to paint. Rembrandt was also known to experiment with lots of techniques and materials, and as far as we know, he was the only Dutch 17th century master who used this sand ground method. Financially and practically, he probably found the mixture of sand and pigment very convenient. Okay, let's get into it. The first step in creating a quartz sand ground is sifting through the raw beach sand to remove any contaminants that might be there. I use an ordinary kitchen strainer to do this, and then I begin washing the beach sand in a large basin with clean, fresh water. I have this plastic storage bin here, which works well for this purpose, and I'll decant the water about 5 to 7 times before letting it dry out until it's bone dry. This allows lighter contaminant material to be picked up and carried away by the water. I then put the washed sand on my granite grinding slab. I'll dilute it with distilled water and mull the sand for 1 to 2 hours. It's a lot of grueling work, and it's no wonder that in old masters' workshops, young apprentices were the ones who did this type of work. It's amazing how the sand starts to thicken and transform. The color of the sand will begin to lighten as it starts to become more clay-like in consistency. I let the mulled sand dry on the granite slab for 24 hours to allow all the water moisture to evaporate. The following day, I scrape up all the mulled sand and collect it in a clean container. Incidentally, mulling sand is also a really efficient way of cleaning a granite slab and muller. The sand at this point has been transformed and is now much finer and lighter in color than the raw beach sand I started with. Next, I'll measure out a mixture of 70% sand to 30% pigment by weight on my digital scale, and I measure at basically 140 grams of dried mulled sand to about 60 grams of pigment, in this case my Italian red Sartorius Earth by Rublev. I mix the 2 dry ingredients together and mull the mixture with refined linseed oil into a stiff paste. I use my own sun-thickened linseed oil for this step. Once the mixture is mulled and fully incorporated, I start putting it on my panel. I use a fresh 2-inch chip brush to apply it, and then I smooth it out with a drywall scraper to sort of mimic a traditional primer's knife, which is shown here in the illustration from 1620, and this one is in the Mayerne manuscripts found in London at the British Museum. It's amazing how this quartz sand pigment mix fills in the weave of my linen so well. Once my panel is fully covered and leveled out, I let it dry for 2 to 4 weeks before moving on to the next and final ground layer. So my panel's been drying for about a month, and I'm ready to apply the final ground layer. This layer would be a combination of lead white, calcium carbonate, and a bone black mixed to a mid-gray color. I like to match a number 5 on the Munsell value scale, which is usually about a 50-50 mix of black and white. I start by using a super fine sanding sponge to even out any small inconsistencies on the surface before preparing my final ground mixture. To make it easier, I'm using Rublev lead oil ground, which contains lead white, titanium white, and ground calcite. The ground calcite will have low water absorption properties and will allow the ground to develop better blister and crack resistance. The titanium white will increase the opacity of the ground, and most importantly, the lead white will contribute to more film flexibility. This Rublev lead oil ground is mixed with linseed oil for a semi-absorbent ground that's ideal for oil painting. Depending on the local conditions, it takes between 2 days and 1 week to dry. And because of the lead content in this product, it's really important to use PPE, which means gloves and a mask for this step. I apply a good amount of lead white mixture to my granite slab and try to match that quantity with bone black oil paints, in this case also by Rublev. I'll mull the mixture for a few minutes to make sure the color is homogenized thoroughly. I have a Munsell value scale on hand, and I use it as reference to make sure I'm close to the number 5 gray value. If I'm a little bit off, I'll just adjust accordingly. Once I have the right gray color, I apply it directly to my panel, and then with a standard foam roller, the kind you get at Home Depot, and these are the ones that house painters use to work on trim, I roll over the surface to smooth and even out the texture of the ground paint. The last and final ground layer has been drying now for about a week, and I'm very excited because my combination panel is finally complete. It's taken a few months to arrive at this stage, but I'm thrilled with the results. It looks fantastic in my opinion, and this quick illustration makes it easy to understand all the layers in creating a combination panel, starting with the creation of the basswood support for the birch plywood to sit on, the staining and sealing of the panel, adhering the linen, sizing the linen, and then applying the 2 ground layers, the quartz sand ground and the lead white ground. The panel's texture is relatively smooth, but it has a very fine tooth, which is subtle and random. It's not perfectly smooth, and it's also not what I would call a deep pour surface, like for example what you might get with a prefab commercially manufactured cotton canvas, kind of like the ones I showed you at the beginning of this video. It has a nice simple tooth that's modern and understated. I added brass tacks to the side of the combination panel, evenly spaced. And I usually don't care how the sides of my panels look because they'll be hidden within the frame, but after all this work, it's nice to finish it off with a shiny detail. And at the end of the day, they're really just a decorative addition. So now the moment of truth is to install the panel into my frame and see how it fits. And let me tell you, I've got a perfect fit on this combination panel. I use 4 2-inch brass mending plates to help secure the panel to my frame, and everything's ready to go. I've prepared the wall hanging piece for my French cleats with 3 drill holes that I countersink so that my installer can hang the piece flush and firmly. So that's it. All that's left now is to paint my masterpiece. Until next time, what's your means of meaning? Just one more thing before I leave you. I made a bit too much of the double ground mixtures, so I decided to tube them up in these aluminum paint tubes for another panel. If you're interested in trying a double ground but don't have the ability to make the mixtures yourself, please leave me a comment and let me know if this is something you'd like. I can set up a link on my website where you can find them, and if you want more videos like this, please subscribe to the Means of Meaning YouTube channel. Check out my website, JORDINMimran.com, and Instagram @JORDINMimran.